For a time, Charles Milliard's best asset in Quebec politics was that almost no one knew who he was. The Liberal leader took over the reins last winter as his party was embroiled in yet another political scandal involving cash in envelopes. Milliard's predecessor, Pablo Rodriguez, resigned in December after his camp was accused of giving party members money in exchange for support in the Liberal leadership race. And while there's no proof Rodriguez personally knew of the alleged scheme, his resignation paved the way for Milliard's acclamation as party leader. Just months ahead of the provincial election, Milliard entered a race where most candidates are widely disliked. In a La Presse poll that asked voters who would be the best premier, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon was number one, with 25% of respondents supporting the PQ leader. Who was the number two choice? None of the above. Another way of reading the poll is that 76% of Quebecers don't think PSPP is a good choice for premier. And while Milliard placed fourth in the poll behind none of the above and CAQ leader Christine Fréchette, he isn't as disliked as most of his political opponents. Some 47% of Quebecers have an unfavorable view of PSPP, according to a Palace data poll released last month. That same poll found Conservative leader Éric Duhaim's unfavorability at a staggering 56%. But aside from not being PSPP or Éric Duhaim, what does Milliard bring to the table? Stop me if you've heard this one before. Milliard said he's going to build a multi-billion-dollar bridge between Quebec City and Lévis by partnering with the private sector. This, despite no studies showing the bridge is necessary and 2 failed attempts by the CAQ to launch the project. And it's not like public-private partnerships are a model of success in this province. The MUHC Super Hospital went way over budget and was literally flooded by a river of shit after opening in 2015. One of the masterminds of that project, Arthur Porter, died in a Panamanian jail after trying to flee corruption charges in Quebec.
Arthur Porter seemed a shadow of his former self. Paraded through the parking lot for cameras by Panamanian police, he did not speak, but acknowledged this question.
Do you expect to fight extradition, sir?
Porter is facing numerous charges, including fraud and money laundering, linked to the handing out of the contract to build a Montreal mega hospital.
For the record, Porter was a well-known Liberal donor. Now, this is just one election promise, but the more you look into Milliard's platform, the more it reminds you of the same old Liberals.
So Milliard launched his campaign with a promise to invest in schools and hospitals. So what's his plan for education?
Well, he wants to hold what he called an état généraux, like a general assembly, that focuses on the education system in Quebec. It would be the first time in 30 years that a premier has done this. But he's also said that he will not change what we call in Quebec le système à trois vitesses, the 3-speed system. The education system is a disaster. Only 15% of kids who go through Quebec's public school system end up in university. The Quebec's Conseil d'éducation supérieure has called our system the most unequal, uneven, undemocratic system in Canada. The problem is you can't fix that without addressing like a fundamental inequity within the system. We in Quebec, we're one of the only provinces that heavily subsidizes private school and another kind of school that we call les programmes particuliers. So like a school that specializes in basketball or a school that specializes in theater. These get public funding as well. What ends up happening is all of the kids who can't afford to go to private school or who don't have a basketball-like genius skill that they can end up in this programme particulier, they end up in the public system where there are a ton of special needs kids, where there are a lot of kids for whom French isn't their first language, and where the dropout rate is abysmal, one of the worst in Canada. So like it sounds, I think, to a lot of people as though he is making a promise he can't deliver on. Like, yeah, you can have a meeting about it, but if you don't change this fundamental inequity, we're screwed.
All right, yeah.
Yeah, it's not good. No, it's bad. It's very bad.
And the système à trois vitesses has been kind of brought up as being a very problematic issue. I think Québec solidaire is calling for it to be removed. Nobody
who's ever come within like an inch of power in Quebec has like actually changed the system. The system really started to fall apart under the Liberals, under Jean Charest in the early 2000s, when he took these schools for kids with special needs and emptied them out into the public system. And he said, we will provide you with more resources to help these kids who have learning disabilities. That never happened. So what started off as a good idea of like, hey, mainstreaming these kids, kids at a public school will have exposure to kids with special needs and we'll all learn together. What ended up happening is instead we're kind of warehousing all these kids. And like if you're poor in Quebec, your odds of getting out of poverty through education are garbage. And I don't see that changing unless, again, we do this very difficult thing and pull a ton of money out of the private system and put it back into the public system. There are certain movements. There's a lobby group in Quebec City that's working on kind of attacking this problem. But other than Québec solidaire, which is a distant fourth or fifth in the polls, there's not a ton of support for it politically.
For removing it.
Yeah. People in theory want this, but then the parties also know that it would be difficult, politically costly, and so they're not going to do anything about it. So, if your kid's in school and you can't afford private school, then the message is basically fuck you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's our education system, which is a big part of what needs to change. What about healthcare?
Okay, well, if you thought that things were bad during the pandemic, now, I think the CAQ has a huge share of the blame here. The CAQ never really, they voted against a public inquiry into their handling of the pandemic, and we had more deaths per capita here than I think anywhere else in Canada. We have a bad healthcare system, but they didn't create the bad healthcare system. Two very important things happened over the last 30 years. One was the reforms of Gaétan Barrette. He was the last Liberal Minister of Health. Or at least the last major one. And his whole reform was we're going to eliminate a bunch of managerial positions and we will create efficiencies. And what that ended up doing was thousands of people left the public health system, went into the private system. Quebec started financing the private system more. And the same thing that we're seeing in school, we're seeing in the healthcare system. If you can pay, you'll be okay. Because the province partially subsidizes private healthcare, you can get private healthcare at a relatively affordable cost point if you have money. But if you don't have money, you're screwed. And this, it didn't start with the Liberals. It was already bad. Lucien Bouchard under the PQ forced or coerced a bunch of doctors into retiring early. My grandfather was one of those doctors. And that obviously didn't help the system. So, it's hard to talk about the Liberals' approach on healthcare. They haven't really put anything forward yet, but it's hard to talk about it without thinking about how bad things were under the Liberals last time around. We're talking about the mega hospital, the super hospital, the MUHC super hospital, where Arthur Porter ended up being convicted, or he was charged with, and he tried to escape the country, accepting bribes and rigging the bids in favor of SNC Lavalin, this engineering firm, to be the company that would oversee the construction of the super hospital. And they were just really bad. The project was so poor that there was and maybe Justin can cut to this headline, but there was flooding that was so bad when they opened the super hospital that there was I think the term used in the Gazette was rivers of diarrhea-like substance in the hospital. And things have not gotten that much better since then. So it's really hard to take the Liberals seriously. And I think that's why so many voters hesitate, right? And so I guess what else do they have going for them, right?
Yeah. And the CAQ has spent the last 8 years kind of centralizing healthcare as much as possible, most recently with creating Santé Québec, which when you talk to healthcare providers has had some unintended, unfortunate consequences. Is there talk of breaking up Santé Québec or
Really, I think there's a reason why Milliard, the big ideas that he's pitching is I'm the only Federalist. I'm the only true Federalist you can vote for, which is not a surprise to anybody. The Liberals have always been Federalists. This is not new information. And promises to help save the French language. These are all promises that have nothing to do with healthcare and education because they're very, very, very hard and controversial topics. And if you don't tread carefully, you're going to end up stepping on a rake and getting it in the face. I don't know if you've ever done that. When I was 10 years old, I did that. just to see what would happen. I was too embarrassed to cry to my mother about it. My nose was covered in blood. But that is neither here nor there. What I would say about like the CAC's approach on healthcare is that they're also guilty of electoralism, right? Like they're going to give doctors a huge bonus if they can accept X amount of new patients before the election, so that essentially the CAC can say, look, all of these Quebecers have a family doctor. And what's really happening is that a doctor who has all of these extra patients can't clone himself or herself or themselves. They basically, you'll just be waiting longer, right? You'll book an appointment with your doctor in 2 months, which is not exactly ideal when you're suffering with a medical ailment that needs something right away. So what do? You go to the emergency room, and the whole kind of vicious cycle repeats itself. Yeah. Or you go private, right? You borrow money, you put it on your credit card, you do whatever it is you have to do to get healthcare. But the system is broken, and I don't see any major kind of promises on Milliard's part.
Yeah. Because with each new patient that a doctor takes on, it's also a lot of paperwork that is done. The doctors spend a lot of time doing paperwork, right? Okay, and so how is Milliard like pitching himself to Quebecers? You mentioned the Federalist option.
He's doing the liberal trick of trying to be everything to everyone, right? Like he wants to defend secularism in Quebec, but he also is he in favor of Bill 21 or is he against it? He's kind of tried to play both sides of that argument, saying like, look, ultimately in a perfect world that he would stick by the Bouchard-Taylor Commission recommendations for secularism. So that means religious symbols would be banned for cops, judges, prison guards, those kinds of coercive authority figures, not teachers. Teachers would be exempt. But he's also said that Bill 21 is not why he got into politics. And I think this, I don't know that if you're, say, like a visibly Muslim voter and you see that the liberals are not willing to defend you, you're not going to go and put your vote with the PQ, right, necessarily, or who are pretty overtly anti-Muslim. And you're not going to put your vote with or the CAC, who are also pretty overtly anti-Muslim. So what might end up happening instead is the voters just stay home. And I think probably what I would wrap this on is that Milliard is pitching himself as a new voice in the Liberal Party because he is a fresh face, right? And people don't have a negative opinion of, him and Christine Fréchette are two of the only mainstream candidates who have an unfavorability rating under 40%. Give it time, it'll go up. But I think the reason is we don't know who they are. But in Milliard's case, he's been a volunteer with the Liberal Party for over 28 years. The last 28 years for the Liberals have not been scandal-free. In fact, that's probably where the biggest concentration of all their scandals have been. Jean Charest, Philippe Couillard, these have not been good years for the Liberals. So I have a really hard time, and I think voters also are not stupid. Yeah, you're a new face. Yeah, you're a little bit different. Yeah, you're 47, which in politics means you're young. But what is it about you that's really different? And I think it's important to have that kind of sobering thought before you go to the ballot box.
Yeah. You always say that the Liberals are always trying to be all things to all people. And so sometimes it can make it hard to form an identity that way. Exactly.
It's just we are whatever the polls want us to be. And I think that, say what you will about PSPP, his attitude shifts now and again, but by now it seems like he has certain core beliefs that he will not stray from unless the polls tell him otherwise. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. But, that's Canadian politics for you. We don't vote for things. We vote against them, right?
Yeah.
Democracy.
It's shaping up to be an interesting provincial election later this year. So.
Well, interesting is one way of describing it. I think it'll be dirty and horrible, and it'll make us all want to cry at one point or another. Yeah.